What's happening? This your boy, your host, off the chill fitter, man. Y'all just lay around. We finna get a live podcast, man, and we watching Yahoo Finance. Shout out to Yahoo Finance. So y'all just lay around and check out the meeting with Mr. Jerome Powell. It is very serious. Dealing with the economy right here. So I'm finna take it, and we're gonna get it in for sure. I'll be right back. Finna get ready and crank it up now, so y'all be ready, baby. There you go. There you go. All right, let's get it in. Turn up the volume for y'all.
Good afternoon and welcome. My colleagues and I understand the hardship inflation is causing, and we are strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Over the past year, we've taken forceful actions to tighten the stance of monetary policy. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our rapid test so far are yet to be felt. Even so, we have more work to do.
Okay.
Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve and serves as the bedrock of our economy. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of labor market conditions that benefit all. Today, the FOMC raised our policy interest rate by 25 basis points. We continue to anticipate that
25.
ongoing increases will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time. In addition, we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet. Restoring price stability will likely require maintaining a restrictive stance for some time. I will have more to say about today's monetary policy actions after briefly reviewing economic developments. The U.S. economy slowed significantly last year, with real GDP rising at a below-trend pace of 1%. Recent indicators point to modest growth in spending and production this quarter. Spending appears to be expanding at a subdued pace, in part reflecting tighter financial conditions over the past year. Activity in the housing sector continues to weaken, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slow growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. Despite the slowdown, the labor market remains extremely tight, with the unemployment rate at a 50-year low, job vacancies still very high, and wage growth elevated. Job gains have been robust, with employment rising by an average of 247,000 jobs per month over the last 3 months. Although the pace of job gains has slowed over the course of the past year and nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, the labor market continues to be out of balance. Labor demand substantially exceeds the supply of available workers, and the labor force participation rate has changed little year. Inflation remains well above our longer run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending in December, total PCE prices rose 5.0%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.4%. The inflation data received over the past 3 months show a welcome reduction in the monthly pace of increases. And while recent developments are encouraging, we will need substantially more evidence that inflation is on a sustained downward path. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad survey of households and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. But that's not grounds for complacency. Although inflation has moderated recently, it remains too high. The longer the current bout of high inflation continues, the greater the chance that expectations of higher inflation will become entrenched. Fed's monetary actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to earning inflation to our 2% objective. Mm-hmm. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target for the by 20, bringing the target range to that. Mm-hmm. And we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet. With today's action, we have raised interest rates by 4.5 percentage points over the past year. We continue to anticipate increases in target range of federal funds rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently for inflation over. We're seeing this in most institutions of housing. It will take time, however, for the full effect of monetary to be realized on it. Monetary policy and lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, the committee decided to raise interest rates by 25 basis points, continuing this down from last year's rapid pace of increase. Shifting to a slower pace will better allow the committee to assess the economy's progress toward our goals as we determine the extent of future increases that will be required to attain a sufficiently restrictive stance. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting, taking into account data and look for activity. We have been taking forceful steps to moderate demand so that it comes into better alignment with supply. Overarching focus using our tools to bring inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. Historically, is prematurely loosening. We will stay the course until the job is done. We understand that our communities, businesses, a country, everything we do is in the result mission. We at the Fed will we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Chris Rugaber of Associated Press, thank you for doing this. As you know, financial conditions have loosened since the fall, with bond yields falling, which has also brought down mortgage rates, and the stock market posted something in January. Does that make your job of combating inflation harder, and could you see rates higher and you the want to increase in or to offset the easing of financial conditions?
It is important that overall financial conditions continue to reflect the policy restraints that were put in place, inflation net, and of course, very significantly over the past year. I would say that our focus is not on short move, but on sustained changes to broader financial conditions. It is a judgment, not efficient, restrictive policy stance, which is an ongoing financial conditions, not just our policy. And we will take into account overall financial conditions along with many other factors as we set policy.
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you for taking our questions. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Over the last quarter, we've seen a deceleration in prices, in wages, and a fall in consumer spending, all while the unemployment rate has been able to stay at a historic low. Does this at all change your view of how much the unemployment rate would need to go up, if at all, to see inflation come down to the levels you're looking for?
So I would say it is a good thing that the disinflation that we have seen so far has not come at the expense of a weaker labor market. But I would also say that disinflationary process that you now see underway is really at an early stage. What you see is really in the goods sector, you see inflation now coming down because supply chains have been fixed. Demand is shifting back to services, and short have been abated. So you see that in the housing services sector. We expect inflation to continue moving up for a while, but then to come down as soon as new leads be lower. So in those two sectors, you've got a good story. The issue is that we have a large sector called non-housing service, core non-housing services, where we don't see disinflation yet. But I would say that so far, what we see is progress, but without any weakening in labor market conditions.
Has your expectation for where the unemployment rate might go changed since December?
You know, we're going to write down forecast at the March meeting, and we'll say that it is fine to see the disinflationary process now getting underway, and we continue to get strong labor market data. But you know, we'll update those forecasts in March.
Hi, Chair Powell. Neil Irwin with Axios. You and some of your colleagues have emphasized the possibility that job openings could come down, and that would let some of the air out of the labor market without major job losses. We saw the opposite in the December JOLTS this morning, job openings actually rising. That also has coincided with slowdown in wage inflation. Do you believe that openings are an important indicator to be studying to understand where wage inflation might be headed?
So you're right there, of course. What we've seen average hourly earnings, and now the employment cost index abating a little bit, still off of their highs of 6 months ago and more, but still at levels that are fairly elevated. The job openings number in JOLTS has been quite volatile recently, and I did see that it moved back up this morning. I do think that it's probably an important indicator. The ratio, I guess, is back up to 1.9 job openings to unemployed people looking for work. It's an indicator, but nonetheless, you're right. We do see wages moving down. If you look across the rest of the labor market, you still see very high payroll job creation, and you know, quits are still at an elevated level. So by many indicators, the job market is still very.
Thank you. Cole with the Financial Times. Given the meeting, is the trajectory for the Fed funds rate in the most recent SEP still the best guidepost for the policy path forward, or does ongoing now mean more than 2 rate rises now?
So you're right. At the December meeting, we all wrote down our best estimates of what we thought the ultimate level would be, and that's obviously back in December, and the median for that was between 5 and 5.25%. At the March meeting, we're going to update those assessments. We did not update them today. We did, however, continue to say that we believe ongoing rate hikes will be appropriate to attain a sufficiently restrictive stance of policy to bring inflation back down to 10%. We think we've covered a lot, and financial conditions have certainly tightened. I would say we still think there's work to do there. We haven't made a decision on exactly where that will be. I think, you know, we're going to be looking carefully at the incoming data between now and the March meeting and the May meeting. I don't feel a lot of certainty about where that will be. It could certainly be higher than we're writing down right now. If we come to the view that we need to write down to move rates up beyond what we said, and we would certainly do. At the same time, if the data come in the other direction, then we'll make data-dependent decisions at coming meetings.
Quick follow-up: how are you viewing the kind of balance of risk options of the likelihood of maybe falling short of that or going beyond that level?
I guess I would say it this way: I continue to think that it's very difficult to manage the risk of doing little and finding out in 6 or 12 months that we actually were close but didn't get the job done, and inflation springs back and we have to go back in, and now you really do worry about expectation on anchor kind of thing. This is very difficult. Whereas, of course, we have no incentive and no desire to, but if we feel like we've gone too far, we can certainly and inflation is coming down faster than we expect, then we have tools that would work on that. So I do think that in this situation where we have still inflation in 40 years, the job is not fully done. As I mentioned, we have a sector that presents 56% core inflation index where we don't see disinflation yet. So we don't see it. It's not happening yet. Inflation in core services X housing is still running at 4% on a 6 and 12-month basis. So there's nothing happening there. In the other two sectors representing less than 50%, you actually, I think, now have a story that is credible, that's coming together, although you don't actually see disinflation yet in housing services, but it's in the pipeline, right? So for the third sector, we don't see anything here. So I think it would be very premature to declare victory or to think that we've really got this. We need to see, our goal, of course, is to bring inflation down. And how do we get that done? There are many factors driving inflation in that sector, and they should be coming into play to have inflation, the disinflationary process begin in that sector. But so far we don't see that. And I think until we do, we see ourselves as having a lot of work left to do.
Howard Schneider with Reuters, and thanks as usual. So I just wanted to connect a couple dots here. The statement made a number of changes that seem to be saying things are getting better, saying inflation has eased, that's new. You've taken out references to the war in Ukraine as causing price increases. You've taken out references to the pandemic. You've eliminated all the reasons that you said prices are higher, yet that's not mapping to any change in how you describe policy. We still have ongoing increases to come. So I'm wondering, why is that the case? And does it have more to do with
told you the housing sector got 50%,
or more to do with not wanting to give a very overeager market a reason to get ahead of self and overreact?
Too high. You know what I'm saying?
I would say it this way. We can now say, I think, for the first time, that the disinflationary process has started. We can see that, and we see it really in goods prices so far. Goods prices is a big sector. This is what we've happened since the very beginning, and now here it is actually happening. And for the reasons we thought, it's supply chains, it's shortages, and it's demand revolving back towards services. So this is a good thing. But that's around a quarter of the PCE price index, core PCE price index. So the second sector is housing services, and that's driven by very different things. And we, as I mentioned, with housing services, we expect, and other forecasters expect, that measured inflation will continue moving up for several months, but will then come down, assuming that new leases continue to be soft. And we do assume that. So we think that that's sort of in the pipeline. We actually see inflation in the goods sector, and we see it in the pipeline for two sectors that amount to a little less than half. So this is good, and we note that when we say inflation is coming down, that this is good. We expect to see this inflation process will be seen.
It's going to hit that housing.
We hope so.
That's what
in the core X housing. Sorry, the core services X housing sector that I talked about. We don't see it yet. It's 7 or 8 different kinds of services. Not all of them are the same, and we have a sense of what's going on in each of those different subsections. Probably the biggest part of it, 60% of that is, research would show is sensitive to slack in the economy, and so the labor market will probably be important. The labor market's not going to be important. Many other factors will drive it. In any case, we don't see disinflation in that sector yet. I think we need to see that. It's the majority of the core PCE index, which is the thing that we think is the best predictor of headline PCE, which is our mandate. So it's not that we're neither optimistic nor pessimistic. We're just telling you that we don't see inflation moving down yet in that large sector. I think we will fairly soon, but we don't see it yet. Until we do, I think we see see ourselves as having perhaps more persistent, more persistent inflation in that sector, which will take longer to get down.
That ain't been hit yet.
And we're just going to have to, we have to complete the job. I mean, that's what we're here for.
We're just gonna raise the price, or we're gonna lower it.
It's going to raise for the new month. Then after it get his peak, it's going to fall all the way back down because he dropping. He want to get the interest rates down like 2%. That way housing become affordable again. You see what I'm saying? That's why he's hitting other sectors. It's supply and demand sector.
Why do you think
That's why everything already high right now. When you go to 125, 150. Now you go up to 220.
So we've raised rates 4.5 percentage points. And we're talking about
Food gonna go down when
rates at a level we think is really restrictive. And why do we think that's probably necessary? Because inflation is still running very hot. We're, of course, taking into account long and variable lags, and we're thinking about that. Really, the story we're telling about inflation is to ourselves, and the way we understand it is basically the three things that I've just gone through a couple times. And again, we don't see it affecting the services sector ex housing yet. But I mean, I think our assessment is that we're not very far from that level. We don't know that though. We don't know that. So I think we're living in a world of significant uncertainty. I would look across the spectrum of rates and see that real rates are now positive, right, by an appropriate set of measures, are positive across the yield curve. I think policy is restrictive. We're trying to make a fine judgment about how much is restrictive enough. That's all.
You got it inverted.
That's where we're going to 25 basis. We're going to be carefully watching and watching inflation and watching the progress of the inflation process.
You colleagues discussed cause at this meeting.
Yeah, we is, but it's gonna be time consuming.
You'll see the minutes will come out in 3 weeks, and we'll give you a lot of detail. We spent a lot of time talking about the past,
like 18 months.
And the state of the economy.
When he started it,
I wouldn't want to start to
it was like at describe all the
details there, but that was the sense of the discussion, was really talking quite a bit about the path.
7 points or something like that. So now, did like a 25 basis rate hike, 25.
Hi, Chair Powell. I wanted to ask about the debt
So now it's down, like you said.
given that we've now hit up against, I was wondering if the U.S. goes past the X date,
Trying to get it down. It was just not
as it relates to making payments, is the
So now it's
agent,
at
or
like
will it do its own analysis of each
So he's trying to get it all the way down to 2%.
So your question is, would we say your question
Still
again?
kind of high.
Will the
But
Fed do what Treasury acts as it relates to payment, or will it do its own analysis of any legal constraints?
So you're really asking about.
So when you pay interest, what you paying? You paying the company as an owner?
So I
bank.
feel like I have
Yeah,
to
but
say this. There's only
Anybody
one
who got
goal
in-
here,
anybody who
and
got
that is for
injured
Congress to
on it.
raise the debt ceiling so that the United States government can pay all of its
Go by that.
obligations when
Go by that.
and any deviations from that path would be highly risky, and that no one should assume
No.
that the Fed can protect the
I thought
economy.
this
That's
was
the
it.
man. And he the one that make
failing to
that
act
Fed
timely.
feel right there.
In terms of
That's
our
the Central
relationship
Bank
with
of
Treasury,
America.
we are their
They
fiscal
not
agent.
even.
Yeah, that's the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, they a whole
Actively
separate
doing any
branch.
planning of
They
what might
private.
happen in the
Private.
event.
They down there like, yeah.
I'm just going to leave it at that. This is a matter that's to be resolved between it's really Congress's job to raise the debt ceiling, and I gather
But I
that
thought
discussions
different
happen,
meetings
but they
had
don't
different
involve
interests.
us. We're not
Yeah, after they put their own on there.
Right.
the
So
You know what I mean?
they reading whatever. They don't put that. Yeah. So
Shit, you go on one of your little apps on Credit Karma or whatever I'm saying, you get a credit card,
Taking our
it
question.
might say 29% APR and all that crazy, you know what I'm saying?
Pausing
Really ain't nothing but-
and then
It's a
restarting
habit,
them.
man.
Lori Logan from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas
It's
seems
a
to
month
suggest
or
that
year.
would be a possibility in a recent
month.
speech. And I wonder if that view is broadly
it's
shared.
interest
with the
every
committee.
month or for the whole year.
So
That's probably for
The
the
committee,
whole year for them.
obviously
But
did not see
for
this.
them, they gonna do it again.
We judged that
I
the
think they do the next meeting in
thing
March.
to do at this meeting was to raise the federal funds rate by 25 basis points, so that we continue to anticipate that ongoing
every
increases
90 days.
in the target range will be
Sometimes
appropriate
60
in
days.
order to attain that stance of
And this one was 60.
efficient monetary
The
policy.
last one he did was in December.
So that's the judgment that we made. We're gonna write down new forecasts in March, and and we'll be looking at the income data as everyone else will.
Sorry, I should have been clear. I mean, would it be possible to take a meeting off, for example, and then resume? You know, could you, rather than just doing at every meeting a move, go a little bit more slowly, take some gaps in between moves?
I mean, I think this is not something that the committee is thinking about or exploring in any kind of detail. Principle, though, you know, we used to do was go every other meeting. If you remember, 25 basis points. That was considered a fast pace. So I think a lot of options are available. And I mean, you saw what the Bank of Canada did, and you know, they left it that they're willing to raise rates after pausing. But this is not something that the Federal Open Market Committee is on the point of deciding right now.
I wonder how they're gonna say that here. They know where everybody else got them $1 billion. Everybody really ain't abandoning the dollar yet.
Meanwhile, the 3-month annualized PCE is 2.1%. And you've
He
achieved this
basically saying
without going to your 5.1%.
all the other sectors okay, like the tech sector,
this year.
the consumer
And you've also achieved it without the 1%
but the housing market service still high. People, they still been in housing.
I'm wondering if you
still
whether or
got
not
rents super high.
you're
You
understanding
know what I'm saying? So what he's saying, that's the only sector that's like 50%
achieve these
of
things
it ain't
without
been
raising
hit.
rates that high,
You said
and
that's the
also
next
without the
How do they hit the housing market? How do they do that?
I wonder if you comment on the speech given by Vice Chair Brainerd, who said,
dealing with
to the
the
extent that inputs other than
building,
wages
supply and demand,
for import price increases,
you know, like it's very difficult. It got like
may
services
not be
dealing
wages,
with the
the
real
idea
estate.
that it may not require unemployment rising to get this sector of inflation.
You know, that's why they.
So a couple things.
They-
First,
they-
on the
So
forecast,
it'd be if you get you a house,
you're right. If you take very short-term
you go in right now,
measures of
you
PCE,
might
PCE inflation,
be
they're
way
quite low right now, but that's because
Right.
it's driven by
Right.
significantly
You know what I'm saying?
negative
So it's good
readings
if it's
from
paused
goods.
and be like, okay,
inflation.
let's see what the feds do.
Most
They're
forecasters
gonna keep raising rates all the way up
would
through
think that
yesterday's year, so they get
significantly
everything
negative readings will be
right.
transitory.
Because he said he wants to see
And
the
that
leases and the rent go
goods inflation will
go
move
go
up
lower.
fairly
You know what I
soon,
mean?
back up to its longer run and something around.
You gotta realize too,
So
like
forecasts would call
pandemic
for the
hits.
core PCE to be 4% by the middle of
So
the
that's why this all
That's
happened.
really where the
You know what I mean? So
sustainable level is.
everybody was
It's more
going
like at
a lot of
4%.
these
So
big
that would
time
suggest there's
people that was already
People really put the money to consumerism. They ain't really put it into like.
let's say
Yeah,
inflation does come down,
except for the ones who were smart enough to,
which is possible.
you know,
As I mentioned,
you gotta
obviously
realize,
our
man,
policy's data dependent. We take that into account. In terms of
realize,
the
like,
the core
States, so
non-housing services, as
that
I
thing
mentioned
global, but at
earlier,
the same time,
it's a
People
very
put money
diverse
in other
sector,
countries.
6 or 7
Africans, they got them
sectors.
scamming us. Shit.
right? So
So
you gotta
sectors
realize
that
a lot of that
represent
money left.
55 or 60% of that
China at the same
subsectors
time,
of that sector
the people that knew what to do with it, like they
we think are sensitive
they
to
wanna invest.
slack in the economy,
what I'm saying?
sensitive to the labor market in a way. But some of the other sectors are not. And for example, financial services is a big sector that's really not driven by labor markets, wages.
Right.
So that's why I said there are a number of things that will affect. Take restaurants, right? So clearly labor is important for restaurants, but so are food prices. And transportation services is going to be driven by fuel prices, for example. So there are lots of things in that mix that will drive inflation. I would say overall, though, my own view that you're not going to have a sustainable return to 2% inflation in that sector without a better balance in the labor market. And I don't know what that will require in terms of increased unemployment, your question. I do think there are a number of dimensions through which the labor market can soften. And so far we've got, as I mentioned, in goods, we have inflation moving down without the softening in the labor market. I think most forecasters would say that unemployment will probably rise a bit from here, but I continue to think that there's a path to getting inflation back down to 2% without a really significant economic decline or a significant increase in unemployment. And that's because the setting we're in is quite different. The inflation that we originally got was very much a collision between very strong demand.
I told you I'm running the stream.
can say really have seen in prior, prior business cycles. And so now we see goods inflation coming down for the reason. And we understand why a story will emerge on the non-housing services sector. There's ongoing disinflation, and we don't yet see weakening in the local market. So we'll have to see. It's a question no one really knows. I think it's because this is not like the other business cycles in so many ways. It may well be that as it will take more slowing than we expect to get down to 2%. But I don't. That's not my base case. My base case is that the economy can return to 2% inflation without a really significant downturn or a really big increase in unemployment. I think that's a possible outcome. I think many forecasters would say it's not the most likely outcome, but I would say there's a chance of it.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg TV. I'd like to pick up on what you were just saying about a substantial downturn and ask, with the full weight of your tightening not in place yet, and with the progress against inflation, there's still a lot of very, very slow growth in the recession indicator, all suggesting that we are going to see recession this year. So I'm wondering if you've changed your view, or you have a more nuanced view of what you think the danger to economic growth is going forward, and whether you're very close to perhaps tipping it into the wrong place for more restraint on your part.
So I do think most forecasts and my own assessment would be that growth will continue, positive growth will continue, but at a subdued pace, as it did last year. We had growth of GDP growth 1% last year, and also final sales growth, which we think is a better indicator of about 1%. I think most forecasts and certainly my assessment would be that growth will continue at a fairly subdued level this year. There are other factors, though, that need to be considered. You will have seen that the global picture is improving a bit, and that will matter for us potentially. The labor market remains very, very strong, and that's job creation, that's wages. As inflation does come down, sentiment will improve. You also, local governments are really flush these days with never consider tax cuts or even sending checks. So I think that's going to support. They're also spending a lot. There's a lot of spending coming in the construction pipeline, both private and public, and so that's going to support economic activity. So I think there's a good chance that those factors will help support positive growth this year, and that's my base case is that there will be positive growth this year.
Thank you. Rich Miller from Bloomberg. First of all, how are you doing?
Fine, thanks. Fine.
Good. Second off, I think earlier on in the press conference, you said you need to see substantially more evidence of inflation coming down. Can you give us some idea of what you're thinking of? You mentioned 3 months, that we've seen 3 months in a row. Governor Walters suggested he might want to see 6 months. Is it just the inflation data, or do you have to see the labor market coming back into better balance to have that substantially more evidence?
So I don't think there's going to be a light switch flipped or anything like that. I think it's just an accumulation of evidence. So of course we'll be looking, by the time of the March meeting, we'll have 2 more employment reports, 2 more CPI reports, and we'll be looking at those carefully, as all of us will, and we'll be asking ourselves, what are they telling us? And soon after that, we'll have another ECI wage report, which, as you know, is a report that we like because it adjusts for composition and it's very complete. And the one was constructive. It shows wages coming down, but still at a high level. They're still at a level that's well above where they were before the pandemic. So I don't want to put a number on it in terms of months, but as the accumulated evidence comes in, it's going to be reflected in our assessment of the outlook, and that will be reflected in our policy over time. But I will say though, it is our job to restore price stability and achieve percent inflation for the benefit of the American public. We're not market participants have a very different job. And it's a fine job. It's a great job. I did that job for years, but in one form or another. But we have to deliver that, and so we are strongly resolved that we will complete this task because we think it has benefits that will support economic activity and benefit the public for many.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Fed Chairman, for taking the questions. So you've talked about we had solid job growth. I'm Edward Lawrence from Fox Business, by the way. We had solid job growth, a slight falling in the increase in spending. It seems so far it's been relatively mild from the economy to go from a 9.1% CPI inflation to 6.5% CPI inflation. Is the hard part yet to come to go from 6.5 to 2?
I don't think we know, honestly. So we, of course, expected goods inflation to start coming down by the end of 2021. And it didn't come down all through 22. And now it's coming down, and it's coming down pretty fast. So I would say this is not a standard business cycle where you can look at the last 10 times there was a global pandemic and we shut the economy down, and Congress did what it did and we did what we did. It's unique. So I think certainty is just not appropriate here. Inflation, it's just harder to forecast inflation. It may come down faster. It may take longer to come down. And our job is to deliver inflation back to target, and we will do that. But I think we're going to be cautious about declaring victory and sending signals that we think that the game is won, because we've got a long way to go. It's the early stages of disinflation, and it's most welcome to be able to say that we are now in disinflation. But that's great. We just see that it has to spread through the economy, and that it's going to take some time. That's all.
How long do you see then the federal funds rate remaining at this elevated level?
So my friends in that they see from the SEP, and I mean there are many different forecasts, but generally it's a forecast of slower growth, some softening in labor market conditions, and inflation moving down steadily. And in that case, if the economy performs broadly in line with those expectations, it will not be appropriate to cut rates this year, to loosen policy this year. Of course, other people have forecasts with inflation coming down much faster. That's a different thing. If that happens, if inflation comes down much faster, then we'll be seeing that, and it will be incorporated into our thinking about policy.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Rabinovich with us. May I ask a further question about the language around ongoing increase, at least 2 further rate rises? If you look at Fed Fund futures pricing, the implication is that you'll raise rates one more time and then pause. Are you concerned about that divergence? Or do you think everything breaks right? Is that a plausible outcome?
I'm not particularly concerned about the divergence, no, because it is largely due to the market's expectation that inflation will move down more quickly. I think that's the bigger part of that. So again, as I just mentioned, our forecast, participants have different forecasts, but generally those forecasts are for continued subdued growth, something in the market, but not a recession, and we have inflation moving down. Into the somewhere in the, these are maybe lower than that this year. We'll update that in March, but that's what we thought in December. Markets are past that. They show inflation coming down in some cases much quicker than that. So we'll just have to see. And we have a different view, it's a different forecast really. Given our outlook, I don't see us cutting rates this year if we get our outlook turns true. As I mentioned just now, if we do see inflation coming down much more quickly, playing policy, of course.
Hi, Chair Powell. Scott Horsley from NPR. One of the changes in the statement this month is that the committee is no longer listing public health as among the data points you'll consider in assessing conditions. What should we make of that? Does the Federal Reserve no longer see the pandemic as weighing on the economy?
That's the general sense of it. And I personally understand well that code is still out there, but that it's no longer playing an important role in our economy. And we kept that statement in there for quite a while. I think we knew we would take it out at some point. There's never a perfect time, but we thought that people are handling it better, and the economy and the society handling it better now. It doesn't really need to be in in the Fed's post-meeting statement as an ongoing economic risk, as opposed to a health issue.
Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. I wanted to go back to another thing that Fed Vice Chair Lael Brainard said recently. She said she doesn't see signs of a wage price spiral. And I'm wondering if you agree with that. I
do. Yeah, I do. I don't see that yet, but the whole point is, once you see it, you have a serious problem. That means that effectively in people's decision making, inflation has become a really salient issue. And once it happens, that's what you allow to happen. And so that's why we worry that the longer we're at this, and the longer people are talking about inflation all day long, every day, the more risk of something like that. But no, there's not much. It's more of a risk. It always has been more of a risk than anything else. By the way, I think it's becoming less salient, and people are, we picked that up in conversations, and I've seen some data too that show people, gradually they're avid inflation count. People really don't like inflation. As it comes down, that could also add a boost to economic activity. You look at the sentiment surveys now, and they're very, very low. With 3.5% unemployment and high wage increases nominally by historical standards, why can that be? It has to inflate, right? So I think once inflation is seen to be coming down in coming months, even you will also see a boost to sentiment, I hope.
So that's what you're looking at most closely is consumer expectations.
That's at the very heart. Is consumers and businesses that essentially we believe that expectation for inflation are a very important part of the process of creating inflation. That's a sort of a bedrock belief. In one way or another, it has to be important. I see the months ago or so, longer term inflation expectations had moved up. We moved quite vigorously last year. Expectations seem to be well anchored, including at the shorter end now, not just the longer end. So it's, and I think that's very reassuring. I think, the markets have decided and the public has decided that inflation is going to come back down to 2%. And it's just a matter of us following through. That's measurably helpful to the process of getting inflation down. The fact that people now do generally believe that it will come down, that'll be part of the process. Very
Thank you, Chair, from Market Watch. In the minutes of there was a couple of sentences that struck people as important when the committee said participants talked about this unwarranted easing of financial conditions was a risk, and it would make your life harder to bring inflation down. I haven't heard you talk much about that today or in the statement, so I was wondering, has that concern eased among members, or is that still something you're concerned about? Thank you.
I would put it this way: it's something that we monitor carefully. Financial conditions didn't really change much from this time to now. They mostly went sideways or up and down, but came out in roughly the same place. It's important that the markets do reflect the tightening that we're putting in place. As we've discussed a couple times here, there's a difference in perspective by some market measures on how fast inflation will come down. We're just going to have to see. I'm not going to try to persuade people to have a different forecast, but our forecast is that it will take some time and some patience, and that we'll need to keep rates higher for longer. But we'll see.
Brendan Peterson with Punchbowl News. I wanted to ask if the Fed into account at all debt ceiling when it comes to quantitative tightening, given the fact that rapid or faster quantitative tightening could bring us closer faster to that drop dead debt ceiling deadline? Could it play an effect as we get closer to that drop dead deadline this summer?
It's very hard to think about all the different possible ramifications, and I think the answer is basically I don't think there's likely to be any important interaction between the two, because I believe Congress will wind up acting, and as it will and must in the end, to raise the debt ceiling in a way that doesn't risk, the progress we're making against inflation and the economy and the financial sector. I believe that will happen. I believe it will happen. We of course will monitor money market conditions carefully as the process moves on. For example, the Treasury General account will shrink down and then it will grow back up, and we understand there'll be lots of flows in the right repo facility and reserves. We understand all that, and we're watching it carefully. We'll just be monitoring it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. You heard it live. Mr.J. Powell, Fighting Knowledge Hustle. This is over, baby. All right, we're going to get on up out of here, man. Let me end this screen. 1 second here. Start sharing. All right. Bike home, baby. All right, we end the broadcast. I do the re-up tonight for y'all. You know what I'm saying? Explain a lot of this stuff, what's going on. So y'all will be tight in the market, tight in the economy. Fighting Knowledge for Hustlers Global Podcast. Tap in for part 2 later. Yay.